From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. A global feminist strike is taking place in commemoration of International Women's Day. Women in more than 170 countries are demonstrating for equality. Many of the rallies started at midnight on Thursday. According to the United Nations, women earn on average 23% less than their male colleagues. And in countries like Mexico, 11 women are killed every day because of their gender. Across Latin America, women have also been taken to the streets. In Argentina, Women's Day marches take on a very political tone. They're very economic. Hundreds of women in Buenos Aires have been laid off since the beginning of the year as part of the Macri administration's austerity measures. The women say they're fighting for their right to earn a living.
Cutbacks imposed by the government directly affect women, since many of us are the breadwinners at home. That was the case for a lot of those fired from the hospital. And furthermore, as women, we are doubly exploited, both at work and at home.
Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Roth, has more.
We are in Plaza de Mayo, one of the sites of the International Women's Day marches. Last year, in Argentina, the motto was Ni uno menos, not one woman less. This year, it will be no more economic adjustments, no more layoffs, and safe, free, legal abortions. Demonstrations will be led by the laid-off female workers of the Posada Hospital, PepsiCo, and other companies that fired their workers due to new government policies. The marches fall on the anniversary of March 8, 1857, when a group of female factory workers in the United States protested for better wages and equality. 40,000 women went on strike. It wasn't until 1975 that the United Nations recognized this day.
Women in Brazil organize marches and mobilizations against Michel Temer's government and the neoliberal policies he's applied. Our correspondent Ignacio Limas reports.
Many marches are taking place in cities all over Brazil. This International Women's Day, women have been protesting in front of the headquarters of the Global Network in Rio de Janeiro. Also, the Women Without Land group, along with other social movements, have joined the marches. Women Without Lands gathered in Michel Temer's Esmeralda Ranch, in the Duartina area. This ranch is managed by Colonel Joao Lima, Temer's associate. The women are calling for investigations into Temer's bank accounts and to restart the agrarian reform. None of the 5 million families without lands have been settled by the government after the coup against Dilma Rousseff, which started the de facto government of Temer. Protests like this happened before, in 2017, when women marched on millionaire Eike Batista's ranch, in Minas Gerais. Today's mobilizations will also take place in Sao Paulo, the city with the largest population in Brazil.
In Ecuador, more women than men face unemployment and a salary gap. Women took to the Ministry of Labor in Quito this International Women's Day to protest these and other issues. The demonstration, organized by Vivas Nos Queremos Ecuador, took the form of a cacerolazo, or a pot banging, with the group crowding outside the ministry with instruments and noisemakers.
One of them is the violence that is against women, gender violence in all forms. Ecuador, I think, has a terrible situation in that respect, in the sense of women being battered, women being sexually assaulted, women not being able to freely walk in the streets in any public spaces because there's a lot of harassment. So that's one of the reasons.
So we come together to struggle, to fight for the value of our lives, the value of our decisions about reproductive rights, the value of our decisions about having or not having children, and the value of our daily work. And we say to men, we say to the state, we say to society, you have to take care. We are taking care every day, every single day. So today we are in strike to remember society that our lives and our work has a value.
And Venezuelan women rallied in Caracas for International Women's Day, with many women connecting the feminist struggle and its place within socialism and the Bolivarian Revolution. The day brought out women and girls from all walks of life who participated in song and dance, while also voicing critical issues related to machismo and the right to access services for women.
The feminist struggle in Venezuela is part of our revolutionary process. Our revolution has been committed with the feminist front. However, there are still a lot of things that need to be examined and analyzed. This is why we need to keep mobilizing and raising our voices to point out the things that we are not accomplishing, always from a revolutionary perspective, because a revolution cannot be completed without feminism.
In Mexico, women are marching to highlight the problems of femicide and other forms of abuse.
Women are marching in the streets of Ecatepec, the most densely populated district in Mexico, and one of the most dangerous to be a woman. They march to pay tribute to all the women that are already gone, and to raise awareness of the harassment and abuse they suffer.
It's not just about femicide, but about all the different kinds of abuse that we suffer every day. So we need to show that the country can't function without us. We're over 50% of the population.
The origin of this violence, according to some social researchers, lies in the economical and political system.
We feel like there's a war against women. This neoliberal system we are currently living in treats people as commodities, and the negative effects are harder for us.
Many believe that the government is not taking appropriate measures to combat the violence.
There's a need for change through education. We need to stop repeating the relationships of power that keep abusive behavior against women happening.
Mexican civil society and social collectives are the ones bringing the most important proposals.
Given the government's incapacity to implement effective measures, we, women, are organizing ourselves to create mechanisms so we can defend ourselves.
They say they will keep marching on the streets of Mexico until women are no longer victims of violence, the gender pay gap disappears, and an equal society is implemented.
Pablo Pérez García, Telesur, Ciudad de México.
In Trinidad and Tobago, women of the armed forces have been honored for International Women's Day. The police force held a parade through the streets of Port of Spain, led by female officers. The Defense Force honored their women as well. There are almost 700 women in Trinidad and Tobago's Defense Force spread across their regiment, Coast Guard, and Air Guard. Officials say they've come a long way since the 80s, when there were less than 50 women enrolled. So let's talk more about the concerns of women in the Caribbean. We're being joined by Dr. Gabrielle Hussein, who's the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. Hello, Dr. Hussein, how are you?
Hello.
So we've seen an increase in the discussion of women's issues in Trinidad and Tobago in recent years. Has that increase in talk been translated into real action?
Let me give you all an example. So in the past year, a woman was killed just after Carnival. This led to a series of protests by women and the removal of a mayor from office. This Carnival, in comparison to the year before, what we saw was the police take a very clear stand and say that any unwanted touching at Carnival time is an act of assault. So what we were able to see is how women protesting, and indeed young women protesting, was not only able to remove a city official, but was able to shape the kinds of messages that police themselves were sending at this Carnival time. I would argue that putting your message out there does in fact make a difference, and that there are times when we can see that difference reflected in what the state desires and ends up protecting on behalf of women.
So I know that the Institute at UA and also many feminist groups in Trinidad and Tobago are trying to push for a national gender policy. Could you tell me what's the result of that push, and why is a national gender policy so important?
A national gender policy has been advocated for in one form or another for 22 years. In the latest incarnation, developed since 2004, the national gender policy has gone through different versions. The challenge with that policy is the inclusion of provisions around the decriminalization of sexual orientation and around the decriminalization of abortion. There's a lot of resistance to it. Now, the thing about a national gender policy is that it's very necessary, because if you don't have one singular policy approach by the state, then what a Ministry of Education is doing could be very different from what a Ministry of Agriculture is doing, or a Ministry of Health, or a Ministry of National Security. And what connects the approaches to gender justice amongst those ministries? One gender policy. So currently, the state has not articulated one politics, one vision with regard to gender justice. And we expect that a version of that long-awaited gender policy is going to be proposed by the cabinet. But we also expect that that version is not going to protect women's sexual rights or their reproductive rights. And we see that as dividing women against each other, giving some rights over others. And that is going to be a struggle that we are going to have to wage with the government, however long it takes.
But I want to go back to a comment that you just made just now in responding to me. You said that there's resistance. Why do you think that is? Resistance to implementing a national gender policy?
The resistance comes from religious groups, primarily Christian religious groups, but not only, who are trying to defend the morality of the state on terms defined by sexuality and reproduction. Our argument in the Caribbean is that Caribbean feminism is homegrown. It is rooted in the struggles that women have been waging since slavery and indentureship. And in enslavement, women were fighting for the right to decide when they had children and under what circumstances, and were practicing abortions. So this struggle is one for us that's 500 years old, just as the struggle to end sexual violence, just as the struggle for pay equity was one that women were struggling against during the indentureship involving Indian indentured workers between 1845 and 1917. The resistance that has to do with the fact that the citizen and the state is defined in ways that make a very narrow notion of morality and a very narrow notion of woman the only one allowed. And of course, the struggle for women's rights is the struggle for women to be allowed to be human as they choose and to be valued not because they meet particular ideals, but simply because they are.
Thank you so much. We've been talking to Dr. Gabrielle Hussein. She is the head of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. My apologies. We're going to take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Colombia, the FARC political party has pulled its party leader, Rodrigo Londoño, out of the presidential race. Londoño is currently recovering from heart surgery after suffering a cardiac arrest last Thursday. In addition to Londoño's health problems, the FARC cited the lack of security and political guarantees as another reason for their withdrawal. However, they have expressed interest in holding talks to form a national convergence government. Our correspondent in Bogotá, Jose Manuel Jimenez, has more.
The Alternative Revolutionary Force of the Commons, known as FARC, has announced the withdrawal of Rodrigo Londoño and his running mate, Imelda Daza, from the forthcoming presidential elections. The reason given is Rodrigo Londoño's health condition after his surgery yesterday. His recovery time is expected to be between 3 and 4 months. It's worth pointing out that this withdrawal pertains to presidential elections, not congressional elections. FARC candidates are expected to continue campaigning.
Meanwhile, Londoño, popularly known as Timonchenko, has sent a video from his hospital bed on the occasion of International Women's Day.
Congratulations to all women, especially to the Colombian ones. Their role in the peace process has been decisive. I hope that you all have a chance today to think about how best to implement the Havana agreements. I count on you to keep building peace in Colombia.
Now, the FARC's decision to pull out of the elections came as its vice presidential candidate, Imelda Daza, was in Britain to try and get international support. Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, reports.
On a 2-day visit to London, Imelda Daza has come to build support for the Havana peace agreements being implemented in her country. She will also talk about the serious human rights situation in Colombia and the difficulties facing her party, the Revolutionary Alternative Force of the Commons, as it seeks to take part in the coming elections.
In Colombia, we have ended an armed confrontation that lasted more than 5 decades. With that, we hoped to begin a more inclusive democratic process in the country. Unfortunately, what we have is the systematic violation of the right to life.
The human cost for Imelda's party has been significant. 38 of its members have been murdered since the peace agreements were signed in November 2016. While recently the FARC was forced to suspend electoral campaigning after violent attacks on scheduled events in different Colombian cities, Imelda is clear what role international solidarity can play.
Peace in Colombia depends a great deal on international opinion, on the solidarity we get in different international institutions that support us.
Imelda Daza's visit to London has been organised by Justice for Colombia, a UK-based human rights organisation set up by the British trade union movement in 2002. Since then, it has played an important role in documenting Colombia's human and labour rights crisis and supporting the search for peace with social justice in the country.
I think the Colombian government listens to the international community. The peace agreement in itself was created with the participation of the international community. So they have an investment, they're invested in this peace agreement being a success.
The Labour Member of Parliament, Tony Lloyd, is one such British politician who has campaigned on human rights and the search for peace in Colombia for a number of years.
But people shouldn't confuse the end of the military conflict with the kind of necessary conditions for Colombia to move forward, which is why Imelda Daza's candidature for the vice presidency and those of other people who are progressive, who are fighting for social justice, for economic justice, for the basic human rights that we take for granted, say here in the United Kingdom, is so important.
Imelda Daza will return to Colombia on Thursday to continue the dangerous job of campaigning in the run-up to May's presidential elections. This Sunday also sees parliamentary elections for Colombia's Senate and House of Representatives. Meanwhile, in Britain's Parliament and elsewhere in the UK, Friends of Colombia's peace process will continue urging the Colombian government to address the human rights crisis and ensure a safe environment for political participation. Pablo Navarrete, Telesur, London.
Election observers are on their way to Grenada for the March 13th election. The CARICOM Secretariat and the Organization of American States have already sent delegations to oversee the elections. They've also invited the Electoral Office of Jamaica to travel to Grenada as well. This election sees the National Democratic Congress led by Nizam Berg running up against Dr. Keith Mitchell of the New National Party, who has been Prime Minister since 2013. He previously served from 1995 to 2008, and he's currently ahead in the polls. And the Electoral Commission of Antigua and Barbuda continues preparations for the elections, which will see Barbudans voting in Antigua despite a legal challenge. The Electoral Commission says they're collaborating with the National Office of Disaster Services to bring approximately 400 Barbudans across to Antigua to vote. They're still working on finding a central location for the vote to take place. There's a legal challenge against the move on the grounds that Barbudans should vote in their own constituency. And in Ecuador, the President of the National Assembly and the current district attorney must appear before the Assembly to give an explanation of recordings made public by the district attorney. He said they revealed a conspiracy to remove him from his post. Denise Herrera reports.
The National Assembly, by unanimous vote, approved the appearance of the President of the Assembly and the current district attorney at the National Assembly.
Después de la comparecencia,
after their appearance, the National Assembly will vote on the dismissal of the President of the National Assembly and also on the impeachment appeal of the District Attorney.
The coming session will be on Friday in the afternoon, where the President of the Assembly and the District Attorney must explain the recorded phone call.
You can be sure that we're not simply clinging on to our positions here. We are defending the country's institutions. The fundamental thing is that our compatriots must be sure that nothing is hidden and that politics is done with the cards on the table, without hiding anything.
On this, President Lenin Moreno has published a statement saying he will continue fighting to preserve unity in the country. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Quito, Ecuador.
Peru's Consumer Association, known as ASPEC, say they are suing Coca-cola for misleading consumers. ASPEC says that Coca-Cola's nutritional information presents confusing, contradictory, and misleading information to consumers. The group says this crucial data is necessary to help the public make informed decisions, particularly regarding the amount of sugar and additives in their products, which also includes Fanta and Sprite. Thousands of women took to the streets of Afrin on Thursday to celebrate International Women's Day and demand the end to hostilities led by the Turkish administration in Kurdish-held Syria. Women with colorful scarves, flags, and musical instruments celebrated the 8th of March, a day marking women's struggle and fight for equality across the world. And scuffles broke out in Kiev when Ukrainian far-right activists attacked a Women's Day march. Images show struggles breaking out between feminist participants and representatives of ultra-right organizations. Before the protest began, despite the attack, the march went ahead with protesters holding banners and chanting against gender inequality, sexual discrimination, and domestic violence. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed a proclamation bringing in tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. The tariffs will go into effect in 15 days. Canada and Mexico are exempt from the tariffs. Trump previously pledged to revisit global trade deals. White House officials say the tariffs are an essential part of domestic and economic security. Critics say it will start a trade war. A cobbler in Palestine will now refuse entry to British or American citizens. That is, unless they're willing to apologize for the actions of their respective countries and the effects they've had on the Palestinian people. Let's find out more.
If you're a Brit or a US citizen, you better be ready to eat humble pie before entering this shoe shop in Ramallah. British citizens are required to apologise and accept their country's responsibility for the Balfour Declaration, which saw the establishment of Israel and the division of Palestine. while US citizens have to grovel over their president's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
The idea has come because I don't have any trust in these governments. So I turn to the people. It is to speak to the people, not to harm them. You are the people who democratically choose the governments, which provide rights over the rights of other people while supporting a bad Israeli occupation.
In Arab culture, the shoe is considered dirty both because it's on the ground and because of its association with the foot, the lowest part of the human body. This being the case, owner Ahmad Al-Hajj Mohammed has taken delight in naming some of the shoes on offer in his shop after Trump, Balfour and US Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley.
Well, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talistotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.